Good morning. I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is Making Sense of the Chaos. We've been discussing eschatology, which is the fancy word for the study of the last things, the end times. We've talked about amillennialism. We've talked about historic premillennialism. We've talked about dispensational premillennialism. I've given you the reasons why I'm convinced those are all faulty. They're bad theology. They employ a bad hermeneutic, and they come to a bad conclusion, and those wrong ideas are going to produce bad effects in our culture, and they have been, and they will continue to do so as long as they are believed, because ideas have consequences. You can't think a thing that doesn't work out somehow in your life. Everything that you do is a result of what you think. So thinking the right thoughts is important. In fact, we're told to renew our minds daily, to love the Lord with all our minds, and that's what we're trying to do here. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but if we're going to straighten out the mess in the world, it starts with straightening out our thinking. Now, if you can possibly believe that Christians are all thinking correctly while the world is going to rack and ruin, that makes no sense. We're the ones responsible for setting the direction of culture. Now, the direction of our culture is clearly going wrong. That cannot be happening on the scale that is happening if Christianity is doing the right thing. And if they're thinking the right things, they'll be doing the right things. So clearly, there are things that we think about God, about what the Bible has to say about man and God, that are wrong. And those wrong ideas are producing the wrong results you're seeing on the streets of America today. Well, maybe it's presumptuous of me, and that certainly is a possibility. But as I look around me, it appears to me pretty clear that God has given me a gift. Now, he's also given me a lot of terrible liabilities. That's true, too. And he's given you gifts. Well, the particular gift that he's given me is the ability to be able to see connections that are not obvious to everybody else. Does that mean I'm smarter than other people? No. I'm better than other people? No. It means I have this gift. You know, the guy who has a gift for lifting weights at a much higher amount than other people, is he a better man than other men? No, he's better at that. The guy who's a better banker, who understands finances, is he a better man? No, he's better at that. We have different gifts. I don't pretend to have every gift. I don't have every gift. I have a few. And this is one of those I have. And how do I know that? Well, because he's also given me a hunger and a thirst to understand how things fit together, how ideas fit together, and how ideas cause actions. Most people aren't interested in that. Well, why not? Well, because God didn't give them an interest in that. Well, why not? Well, because he gave them interest in other things. Well, wouldn't it be good for everybody to have an interest in this? No, obviously not. Why? Well, because if it were a good thing, then God would have given everybody an interest in this. So, no, he didn't. But he gave some people an interest in this, and he designated those people as the ones that have to go out and teach the others what they see. Now, maybe you'll disagree with me, and maybe I'm wrong about a lot of things I think I see. But because I believe I see these things, and because I believe I can make a case for it out of the Bible, then I have an obligation to go to you and to tell you this is what I see, and this is why I believe it's so. Now, you do with it what you want, okay? I'm not puffing myself up. That's not the point. But I'm going to use the gift that God has given me as well as I can to teach what he has taught me to others. Now, you do with it what you want. Anyway, now we're discussing the historical events that conspired to make dispensational premillennialism attractive, what led to its development, and that's where we'll pick up right now. Now, we've been talking about the Reformation and the burst of progress that was made in human cultural and scientific and religious and political areas of life as a result of the Reformation, because they returned to solid first principles from the Bible. And this lasted for several centuries. But now by the 1700s, it's beginning to wane, and by the 1800s, there's some serious problems. But the natural response to the success that the Reformation brought is the same as the natural response to success anytime human beings are enjoying success, and that is we tend to slide into complacency. As I said yesterday, if you've ever coached a team, I mean, ask Nick Saban, who coaches the Alabama football team and previously the LSU football team. He's won a lot of championships, and he will tell you that the worst problem he has with a team that won the championship last year is to keep them away from what he calls the rat poison. What's the rat poison? Well, it's the press clippings. It's what everybody is telling them about how wonderful they are, how powerful they are, how great they are. Because if they believe all that stuff, they're not going to be motivated to go out and continue to strive and fight and struggle to achieve the same level of success that they have previously. Well, it's not only true in a football team, it's true in life. And it was true of Christianity following the enormous gains of the Reformation. Thus, the pattern that emerged over time following the Reformation showed progressively relaxing vigilance by the seed of the woman. Remember now, the elect of God, the church, the believers, they're known as the seed of the woman. Well, now they're beginning to relax their vigilance. They're beginning to get a little complacent, and they're beginning to find it more and more attractive to soft pedal some of the distinctive, what people would consider to be harsh aspects of the doctrines of grace. Because, look, the truth is the gospel is hard. I mean, why do people need to be saved? Because they're desperately wicked sinners. Why would they need to be saved if they weren't? If people were basically good, why would they need to be saved? They just act better and they'd be fine. Isn't that true? But they're not basically good. They're terrible sinners. That's what the Bible teaches. Who wants to hear that? Let me guess. Nobody. Nobody. We suppress that truth in unrighteousness. Isn't that true? So, there is definitely a hard edge to the gospel. And once your fervor for the gospel begins to wane a little bit, you start resting on your laurels, you become complacent. Well, what do you think the first things that you're going to do are? You're going to stop pushing the hard things, and you're going to start focusing on the easier things. Well, that's what they did. But the enmity of the seed of the serpent, unbelievers, remains constant. So they're always pushing against God and against his seed. They're constantly holding the truth down about God, and they're constantly resisting any effort by the seed of the woman to bring the truth to them. That's what they do. Read Romans 1. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Which truth? Well, all the truth about God. And where are they getting this truth from? Well, they get part of it from just looking around. I mean, you see a tree, it's hard not to believe that there's a God who made that tree. How does that tree just come into existence by chance? Do you know how complex that tree is? I mean, if you study trees, you will certainly realize how complex a tree is and how it's absurd to think that this happened by chance. But for unbelievers, that's not a particularly difficult trick. They suppress that truth every day, and they say, well, it just happened by chance. Once again, remember now, there are two ordering principles in the world. Only two. There's God and his order, and there's chaos. And anybody who uses chance as the ultimate principle for order is using chaos, because chance and chaos are the same thing. Is that clear? Complete total randomness is what? It's chaos. It's what also? It's chance. It's the same thing. Just different words for the same thing. But their pressure against God and against God's people remains constant. All right? But the seed of the woman, God's people, they begin giving in a little here and a little there. And you say, well, How can they do that? Well, look around you. You see that in the world today. How did we get to the point where we're recognizing homosexuality as equal with heterosexuality? How did we get to that point? Did we get to that point just like that overnight? Or did we get to that point by slow degrees? Did we first begin by looking at something that is true from the Bible, where Paul says there's neither Greek nor Jew, neither male nor female, okay, but all are equal in the sight of God. So we look at that and we say, well, hey, that's true. So we take some truth and we twist it a little bit and we bring it somewhere else and we have it support something that's not true. Now, because we all stand equally condemned before God, does that mean that we are in fact equal? I suggest that you ask all your friends, male and female, to disrobe, and then you give them the eye test and see whether they're all equal. Are they equal? Or will you find there are some structural differences between the males and the females? Well, you might very well find that, wouldn't you? Huh? Yeah. But how did we get to the point where we allow people to declare by their mouths that they're male even if they're got female stuff? How did we get to that point? Bit by bit, a little at a time, a little at a time. You're just seeing the same process brought out to a much further conclusion, much further extent than what was happening back in the 1600s and the 1700s and the 1800s. But it's the same, very same process, very same process. The seed of the woman increasingly overlooked the unabating hostility and enmity of the seed of the serpent, which is presented, I think I need a comma right here, in the great antithesis, while the seed of the serpent remained a hostile enemy army. The result was predictable and certain. Although it took what seemed a long time by man's measurement for the losses of one side to be solidified as gains for the other, critical mass was reached early in the 19th century, setting the stage for a major reversal in the relative positions of the two seeds. Until early in the 19th century, early in the 1800s, there's no question that the seed of the woman was still the dominant cultural, religious, intellectual factor in the development of all thought in Europe. There's no question, okay? But it had been subject to great inroads by the seed of the serpent. But by the end of the second decade of the 19th century, clearly that process had been reversed. Now, it still looked like it was ambiguous about who really was dominant, but the tide was flowing the other way faster and faster, and was sucking. First, it takes all the people of great ability. Why? Well, listen. If you're born with more ability, more obvious ability than other human beings, what particular sin do you think that person, you in that case, would be more subject to than someone who has a lot less ability than you? Let me guess. Pride. Well, what was the original sin in the garden? It was pride, wasn't it? Pride is where you think you're as good as God. And who is more likely to think that? Is it the most gifted of human beings or the least gifted of human beings? Why should it be a surprise to discover that the seed of the serpent finds its greatest gains always among the best and the brightest of the Christians? Why should that be a surprise? That should be what we would expect. Aren't they the people who are the most filled with pride? Do you know what God had to do to me to humble my pride sufficiently to where I am now, at least not terribly proud? Just bad, but not as nearly as bad as I used to be. Do you know the mess I had to create in my own life before I could see what a terrible human being I was? I don't even tell you. It's horrible, okay? It's horrible. Now, the good side of that is that I can no longer walk around for very long thinking that I'm morally superior to any other human being. I mean, here comes my past drifting right before my eyes, and I say, I don't think I'm going to be able to sustain that argument for very long. Look at you. Well, nasty. Maybe you need to go back and humble yourself, get on your knees before God, and thank Him for His grace. Yes, I do, and you do too. We all do. Anyway, since then, since right around the turn of the 19th century, right around the turn of the 1800s, clearly the tide has been going the other way. I guess I'll move it to the left. Since early in the 19th century, except for a faithful remnant, the bulk of the church has been living on the dwindling theological and moral capital of the Reformation. Now, think about that. You as a private individual, you got some money in the bank. That's your capital. Now, what do you do with your capital? Do you live on it? Or do you live on the income from your capital? Which do you do? Well, if you want to preserve your capital, if you're a smart investor, you don't eat the goose that lays the golden eggs. You feed the goose that lays the golden eggs, and then you pick the eggs and you sell them and live off the eggs. But carving out a wing or a thigh from the goose that lays the golden eggs eventually is going to lead to a dead goose and no eggs. As any banker or investor knows, continuing to live indefinitely on capital is a sure recipe for bankruptcy. Wise investors, moral and intellectual investors as well, live on part of their interest and reinvest the balance to grow their capital and assure the futures of themselves and their posterity. Or at least they don't live on any part of their capital. They may use up all of the interest from the capital, but they don't live on the capital itself, because if you do that, you may be sure that it will dwindle. It will dwindle. It doesn't matter if it's moral capital or money capital, intellectual capital or money capital. It's the same thing, the same process. They may shift capital from one investment to another, but they never use capital for operating expenses. This is as true of spiritual as of financial investments. Ironically, elements of the progress achieved during earlier periods of relative dominance by the children of God are often used by the children of Satan against the regenerate when vigilance is relaxed. For instance, the Reformation saw huge strides forward in the use of man's rationality, in developing systematic theology that threw off the sterility of scholasticism and by its light banished much of the darkness of superstition. Scholasticism, for those who are not familiar, is the name that's used to refer to most of the scholarly work of Roman Catholic theologians from probably around 1100 to even after the Reformation, but certainly at least until the Reformation. Thomas Aquinas would be considered a scholastic, Anselm, and many other of the Roman Catholic theologians. And they spent a lot of time and a lot of thought on some solid, good stuff, but a lot of what they did was sort of like spiritual inbreeding. They weren't bringing the light of the gospel to elucidate the way for the daily lives. How did God's word impact people in their daily lives? They had a tendency to debate high-flown theological issues and not to stress the practical impact of these issues in people's lives, and to show how to apply God's word to those lives. But anyway, Calvin and Luther and the other reformers, they ended that because everything that they said was nuts and bolts Christianity. It was nitty gritty, down to the earth. It was, this is how Christianity works in the world, in your life and my life and in the lives of everyone around us. Both Calvin and Luther wrote copiously, cogently, and with fresh and startling clarity and vigor, so much that each substantially advanced the vulgar language in which he wrote. Vulgar does not mean cussing. It means the language of the people. That's what the word really means. You had Latin and you had the vulgar languages. It just, for instance, the Catholic Bible is known as the Vulgate. That just means it's the language of the people, not written in Latin. Okay? For Luther, the vulgar language was, of course, German, and for Calvin, it was French. As the energy of the Reformation waned and was replaced by a resurgence of worldliness, the manifestation of the bruising of the heel of the seed of the woman by the seed of the serpent was that worldliness. The tools of thinking and language developed by the reformers were used to advance the unregenerate agenda. Okay? You have to understand that because of the effectiveness of the use of language by Luther and Calvin, unbelievers saw what they had done and they said, wow, look at this. We can use these same tools to advance our agenda. And they did. The progress of anti-God humanistic thought can be easily traced by studying the rise of the Enlightenment, which produced the humanistic corollary to the American Revolution, the atheistic revolution with its chaos and massive bloodshed. The Enlightenment, once again, was a result of many, many things, but I imagine its chief characteristic was rationalistic thought, the idea that man and his reason was the ultimate source of all knowledge, of all truth. Okay, that's the backbone of Enlightenment thinking, of modernism. Modernism is just Enlightenment thinking brought into the current context. Now, postmodernism is a whole different thing, is a recognition of the bankruptcy, morally, of modernism. But anyway, we'll get to that more later. The American Revolution, on the other hand, was far more the product of the Reformation and Calvinistic thought than of Enlightenment thought, because it was based on the principles of the Bible. You know, the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the men who wrote the Constitution, the men who fought for the independence of the colonies, these men were steeped in Calvinistic thought. They thought in biblical terms. The Bible was, in all of the writings of all of these men, the Bible was the main document cited by them as an authority for their writings. During the rise of the Enlightenment, rationality, the use of reason to pursue the goal of truth-finding, was replaced by rationalism, the deification of human reason, which morphed into modernism by the early 19th century. As an aside, modernism, okay, now that modernism, well, there's still a lot of modernism in the world today, but it has largely been replaced by postmodernism. But up until about the 90s, the general tenor of Western culture was modernistic, was modernism. Modernism is based on rationalism. Its moral and intellectual capital were rooted firmly in Reformed Christianity, which it despised. Okay? Modernism was a reaction against God and the Reformation, but it drew on Reformed intellectual capital for its sustenance while denying God. And because, of course, it denied God, which was the basis for the Reformation thought, and the basis then for even modernistic thought, for the idea that truth is absolute and can be known, which now under postmodernism is denied, then obviously modernism ultimately was going to self-destruct because it was headed on a collision course with its own contradictory beliefs. One, that you could know truth through your own reason, and two, that you could do that while denying God. You can't. God is the source of our thinking, the source of all truth. If you deny God, you lose a source of truth. You lose truth as an absolute. You lose truth as even a concept of intelligibility. You have to continue to borrow more and more from the Christian worldview because you cannot sustain that worldview out of unbelieving rationalistic thought. You can't. Its repudiation of its own moral and intellectual capital, the very skeleton providing it with structure and form, necessitated its moral and intellectual immolation. What does that mean? Destruction by fire. Out of the ashes of modernism arose the false phoenix of postmodernism. I don't know if you're familiar with Greek mythology, but the phoenix is a picture of a bird arising out of the ashes of destruction and bringing new life, new birth. It's once again portraying order proceeding from chaos. In this case, the chaos is the destructive impact of fire. But it's again chaos. It's destruction. It's not God as the ordering principle for their world. But this false phoenix of postmodernism promised new dimensions of truth and meaning by denying the categories of objective truth and meaning altogether in favor of subjective truth, which is what postmodernism does. Okay, anchoring whatever truth you have. I mean, I heard a CNN news anchor, Don Lemon, talking about he presents his truth. Well, that's nonsense. His truth is his opinion. Okay? It's not truth if it's your opinion. Truth is transcendental. That is, it transcends all human experience and encompasses all human experience. But inasmuch as any of our experience is true, it partakes of the transcendental truth, not the other way around. You can't have transcendental truth of your own that's disconnected from everybody else's transcendental truth. That's just nonsense. What you have is opinion, but you choose to label it as your truth. My truth. My truth. It makes no sense. One does not have to be a prophet to prophesy the imminent dissolution of postmodernism. It's going to fall apart into meaninglessness and chaos supported by the rule of force alone. Aren't you seeing that? Based as it is upon a cosmology of chance, chaos, while denying meaning beyond the momentary emotion, it can do no other. It has nowhere else to go. Out of chaos, you proceed to chaos. Chaos can only produce chaos. It produces no order. It produces the illusion of order as long as it has God's order to feed upon. It's like socialism and communism. They work just fine as long as you have other people's money. Now, where does the other people's money come from? It comes out of God's ordering principle. And when you use up other people's money, all that you have left is chaos. People stumbling along like they are in Argentina today. It's Venezuela. Sorry. One South American country is as good as another for me. That's terrible, huh? Terrible. While I am neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, our apparently dark times seem an especially propitious time for the revival of the gospel through the teaching of the doctrines of grace, because both Arminian Christianity and postmodernism have predictably degenerated into intellectual and moral sterility. This is the time for us to be trumpeting God's message, because the world's got nothing to offer. We have everything. Well, it doesn't look like they're listening to us. It's God in his power that's going to prosper the message, not you, not me. You preach it. This is precisely the ferment out of which God's word has always prospered. I see we've run through our time, and so we will stop at this point and pick up tomorrow morning at 7 once again. So not 7:30. I appreciate your coming along with us today and listening, and I pray that the words that I am speaking are in fact the truth, and that they will come to reside in your heart and change your life as they have mine, and cause you to become more and more faithful, more and more a product of Jesus Christ, and more looking like him in all that you think and you say and you do. Bill, do you have anything you'd like to add? Okay. Well, remember, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Christians, that worse things than dying, and the very worst of all is being unfaithful to God. God bless you.